Hello, everyone. Thank you, Jonah. Thank you, Undersecretary Crane. Welcome, everyone. Very happy to be kicking off with such an interesting panel, which is really on the top of everyone's mind. We're going to be talking about AI-powered low growth and a perspective of that from the investor side and from someone who has been deep in this for many, many years. I'd like to introduce and then have them get their quick bios. Salim Samaha from GIP, thank you for being here, and Nat Sahlstrom from Tract, thank you. So Salim, why don't you give us a little bit of your background?
Great, thank you, and thank you for having me. Salim Samaha, I'm a partner at Global Infrastructure Partners, which is now a part of BlackRock. I oversee the energy business, which for us includes midstream and LNG, renewables, and clean energy or energy transition. And I've been with the firm for about 18 years, and we're currently managing about 170 billion of assets under management in infrastructure, which will include energy as well as transportation, data centers, fiber, and water and waste.
Great, thank you. Nat.
Good morning, it's great to be here with everybody. My name is Nat Sahlstrom, I'm the Chief Energy Officer at Tract. We are a powered land data center development company with operations across 10 different markets in the US, with around 12 gigawatts of powered land secured. Prior to joining Tract as their Chief Energy Officer, I spent nearly 13 years at Amazon, where I built out their energy program, and it was kind of apocryphal to be here because 13 years ago at a hyperscaler, they pretty much ask anyone with a pulse to go engage with the utilities, and I was fortunate to be the first person at that point in time to say, hey, I'll do that job. And we, as you can see, we're all here today talking about that industry and the intersection between energy and what's happening with AI.
Absolutely, this is the moment, right? So Nat, I'm going to start with you. The latest figures we've seen is that demand growth will triple over the next decade or so, and that obviously data centers are a key component to that. Can you give us a quick overview of the big trends that you're seeing?
Yeah, and it's difficult to be succinct here, so I'm going to do my best. Backstage, we were just talking because this question alone we could spend all week talking about. But I observed there's three trends that are happening. The first one is who's going to go pay for all this? And I think Warren Buffett apocryphally called that out in his stakeholder letter, which he said is the IOU model is under strain. And I think it's been under strain for some time from data centers, but we're just starting to see that pressure emerge. And I think that the big trend is who's going to pay for this, and it's looking like hyperscalers increasingly are going to pay for this, and we're seeing this with proposed large data center use tariffs in places like AEP. And I think that's brought a little bit of consternation about the size of the spend, but I think there's some positives to those type of tariffs and those filings because it also enables hyperscalers to integrate their carbon-free power solutions at a scale and speed that wasn't possible with some of the kind of mouse bite ways they've done it before with green tariffs. These new filings are being deliberate about allowing for the funding of big transmission and distribution projects, as well as the integration of new clean energy supply. The second theme that I see emerging is capacity is king. In the last 10 years, a lot of the renewable energy and decarbonization strategies have been decoupled from digital infrastructure. And when I say that, it means that the VPPAs and the renewable energy strategies that many of the hyperscalers have had as part of their strategy has not been linked to actually energizing data centers. So increasingly, when you see investments that are emerging in this space, they are enabling capacity. And I think that's going to be a theme we're going to see more of, in particular with Amazon's investments in the Pacific Northwest. Those will be directly linked towards capacity. And then I think the third theme here is that location still really matters for where data centers emerges. We have yet to see a new large gigawatt scale data center campus emerge in the middle of nowhere. Data center location still really matters. If you go look at where these new regions have emerged, they're within 1 hour of a metro region, they're close to robust metro fiber linkage, close to where their customers are, and I think that's going to continue to be a theme.
Right. So the opportunity, and we'll switch over from this, but the opportunity to kind of think about the user base as opposed to just the residential, utility customer. I mean, that's a real opportunity. Like the superscalers have the ability via all the downloads and the AI and what have you, to spread this expense or this cost over a much larger group of users as opposed to just thinking about it from residential. So it's just a great moment to really think through that. So Salim, obviously BlackRock and Microsoft and MGX announced $100 billion for data centers. Can you give us a little bit of background about that announcement and how you guys are thinking about that as an investable opportunity?
Sure. So a few years ago, we bought a company called CyrusOne with KKR, and it's third largest data center company in the world. And we've seen the growth happen not only in AI, but in general cloud migration. And as we've seen this step change in demand because of AI, we quickly recognized there's a $1 trillion opportunity ahead of us, but nobody's really formed the capital to properly tackle that opportunity. So there was a clear signal that something needed to change. And so we wanted to put together this fund, bring together this great group of partners, raise $30 billion of equity. This will help mobilize $100 billion of investment across the board. But I think just as importantly, we all know energy is a key enabler, and doing energy sustainably long term is going to be extremely important. So having a very large energy business and making sure that that is integrated with and enabling whatever we're doing on the data center side was something that was going to be differentiated and quite important. This is a partnership that's going to be much broader than that. I think the whole industry has to come together. So it's not just about renewables. It's not just about gas. It's really looking at a variety of different enabling infrastructure.
But to that point, on the balance between renewables and just the energy transition overall, how are you thinking about that? And obviously, there's natural gas. You have a big LNG business. Like, how are you thinking about the balance in there?
I think you need all of the above. But I always like to remind people, as an investor, you're putting capital in the ground for 30, 40 years, so you want to make sure whatever you're doing is future-proof. So we're always focused on the sustainability of the infrastructure that we're building, because we are a fiduciary and we have to look out very far. Renewables is certainly a key piece of it. One of the things we're doing is, we were developing a lot of battery storage for a long time. Interestingly, when you're developing battery storage, particularly standalone battery storage, you're really studying the injection and withdrawal capabilities, which is quite similar to what you need to do to install peakers alongside the renewables. So that helps create very, very attractive data center sites. And so we're rethinking that portfolio and put together a good package of renewables, but recognizing that it needs to be supported by natural gas, which can potentially be decarbonized even more over time. Second, we own a lot of gas pipeline infrastructure, primarily through Columbia Gas Pipeline. We have the good fortune of going through Northern Virginia. We go through Ohio and other key data center markets. So massive amount of data centers are being built around that pipeline. And how can we serve that? And how can we do it with a lot more long-term planning? Right now, people are focused on one data center or the other, but if we can bring the industry together and say, I need a BCF a day to go to this particular location, it can be done faster, cheaper, and in a much better way and more decarbonized way for everybody. And then longer term, we're thinking about SMRs. I do think that very, very promising. Definitely some time away before we can leverage that. More globally, we've had some of our relationships that own LNG assets with regas terminals talk to us about looking at siting data centers around those sites, because they do have cooling that's already built into the LNG, so that can also create a more energy efficient data center.
Great. Well, this is a great segue. I was going to ask Nat the question about access and availability, and what does it mean from a global perspective on data center locations, and then how does regulation and kind of government support affect that, and how are you seeing that trend?
Yeah, I certainly see a trend emerging in AI-driven location strategy, kind of following the pattern that we saw with traditional enterprise workloads migrating to the cloud. It's an important thing to note too, and we talk a lot about AI and machine learning and this new growth that's emerging. We forget the fact that the enterprise workloads moving to the cloud, we're still very much in the early days of that. Gartner will estimate that anywhere 25 to 30% of enterprise workloads have actually moved to the cloud. So on top of all of the AI, ML growth that's emerging, it's this massive tidal wave of growth coming, you still have all of the organic growth that's coming from enterprise and new applications being moved onto the cloud right now. So we have two forces emerging, and I think that's really important to note because there is this hesitation from time to time, like, is this really gonna happen? Is all this load gonna manifest? And that uncertainty can mask what's happening, which is still all this massive load growth that emerges just from enterprise workloads. But to the broader point about like where is this happening, it's following the same pattern we saw in the last 10 years, which is starting with North American and the major metro regions, Northern Virginia, Eastern Oregon, the places where you've seen traditional cloud growth happen. And then the next wave is happening in Europe and then into Asia.
And what about regulation? Like, how are you seeing that as it flows? Like incentives or disincentives from certain jurisdictions? Is that playing a part yet, or is it still early days?
I still think it's very much a part around data center site selection, because incentives around sales tax on servers is obviously one of the biggest needle movers for locations. But the incentives and the ability to move fast on the regulatory side to enable new substation build out, permitting, particularly around transmission and new renewable energy projects, those can be catalysts for accelerated deployment of cloud growth in new geographies. And on the other hand, there's cautionary tales of places, Ireland is a great example, Singapore is a great example, where you've basically seen poor policy choreography between IPPs, between system operators, between regulators, where you froze out growth. And I think that that's something to be avoided.
Right, great. So Salim, I wanted to pick up on something that you mentioned in your last comments as it related to technologies that you're looking to invest in, and what's available or is investable now, and how do you think about those, and how do you think about what's coming down the pike, and from GIP, BlackRock perspective?
Yeah, so the first thing is we're trying to deploy a lot of money at scale. So it has to be proven technology at a commercial scale. We can invest in something that is first of its kind, but only if the risk is mitigated. That's not something you really get paid for as an infrastructure investor if it's a first of its kind risk. It has to be something that's going to be sustainable.
Can I interrupt? So everyone, what do you mean by first of a kind? I mean, is that just technology? Is that market? Like, how do you think in the GIP context, what defined first of a kind for us?
I'll use SMRs as an example. There really hasn't been anything of real scale that's been done recently. So our experience is when you're getting supply chains up and running, when the workers that are working on these facilities haven't had as much practice the way they may have in other markets, that creates a potential for significant cost overruns. There are always performance issues and teething issues that you have to go through. So if you're getting middle of the road infrastructure return, you're not really getting paid to take that risk. So there are other people that are better placed to take that risk to get those industries going. And there's so much capital to deploy over time that being the second or third to do something is not necessarily a bad thing. I never want to rule it out, because I think there are ways to allocate the risk where someone's getting the benefit in order to get going, because you do have to get started.
And people are talking about things like order books and, rather than true sequencing, going sequentially, some of those things may be able to help with at least supply chain and workforce and other elements, because at least there's a large focus at a time. So maybe that plays into things over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that planning with the scale to give the different market players a visibility around the demand is always helpful in maturing some of those supply chains as we scale them up.
So I took you off track. So let's go back to what investable now, and how do you think about that?
Yeah, we'll continue to invest in solar, wind, batteries, and we'll do that on a global basis. And we've found that now that the world is maybe a little bit more power short, delivering a global solution to large customers has increasing value. Certainly natural gas infrastructure is an area we will continue to invest in, pipelines to LNG infrastructure. However, we do want any new infrastructure to have the potential for cost-effective carbon abatement. So if it's a natural gas plant, it's got to have the right contractual structure, and then ideally it's going to be placed in somewhere where you can store the carbon or have some other use for the carbon. Long duration storage is something we're also looking at closely. There isn't a clear solution, I think, that works, but it's something that can help you delay some of the need for new natural gas-fired capacity. And then we've also looked at bridge solutions such as fuel cells. However, they can be quite expensive, and it's not always clear that you can deploy them at the scale that you need.
Great. So Nat, the question flipped over to the hyperscalers. How do you think about the technology mix, or how are they thinking about the technology mix, and break that down into 5-year and then a longer period of time?
Sure, I will +1 to a lot of the themes that Salim brought up. Those are important. But one of the things that I think is kind of forgotten when we talk about the longer dated technology is that all of the hyperscalers are starved for capacity now. And a lot of these, it's important to remember that Meta and Microsoft and Amazon and Google, they're tech companies. And I think that they have a little bit of what we would call a kind of a Moore's Law philosophy towards physical infrastructure. And that worked for a long time because we lived in this world where data centers were 5, 10, 20 megawatt buildings, and that was under the threshold of having to do major transmission upgrades or substantial network upgrades. So we all went along our merry way building out new data centers until we reached this point where we're like, wow, we're building 100 megawatt buildings, and we just ran out of power. And then they found out that it takes 18 to 24 months in the best of situations to go build new substations and infrastructure. And the thought was, well, why can't we just get Moore's Law and just go a lot faster? And why can't we run an agile process and have a scrum to go build a substation? That gets exacerbated when you have supply chain crunches. So when I think about that, all those factors that have led where we are today, in the next 5 years, there's going to be a lot of emphasis on technology that is going to enable marginal capacity from existing infrastructure, which is a fancy way of saying, can we use GITs? Can we use anything to go squeeze out marginal capacity from existing infrastructure? Because we all know that 5 years for major transmission upgrades you're doing an awesome job if you're doing that. Even getting additional capacity from some substations, given transformer lead times, is going to be challenging. So I think that one of the things that's been understated is the emphasis on technology in partnership with utilities and hyperscalers to go accelerate first-of-kind grid-enhancing technologies. There's a whole catalog of those things, but you're starting to see hyperscalers be prescriptive about writing the use of those technologies into their contracts. Like the AEP filing recently explicitly called out the ability to go use GITs. And I think that's going to be really important because in the next couple years, there's not going to be some magic solution that enables hundreds of megawatts, whether it's gas, renewables, whatever it may be. It's going to be how can we squeeze out more capacity from existing infrastructure.
Great. Well, since this is the Department of Energy and this is day one, I'd love your perspective on public-private partnerships and what role the Department of Energy or other government agencies could play in this, and how are you thinking about that partnership?
Yeah, I think identifying strategic areas such as data centers from a national security perspective, from a competitiveness perspective, and then really taking on the risks in the early phase of the development of the industry around performance, around cost in a prudent way, is something that I think the government is well suited to absorb. And I think what everybody will find is it doesn't take much at that point in time in order to get the industry off the ground and to get the private sector to take over. I think historically there's been a big focus on, well, we lost a little bit of money here on a specific company, and I think that often misses the bigger picture of what are you trying to get going, what is the size of the prize at the end of that destination, and if the government is not to socialize some of these key costs that are a great long-term investment, then I don't know what it is. I know other countries are going to be thinking along those lines. You look at China, right? They've identified very clear strategic priorities, and then they do it in a way where then it creates a lot of competition in the country and a lot of innovation to push forward in these strategic areas. I think that's our challenge, and I think that's one area I'm most excited about, because there's a tremendous potential in the country.
Yeah, I'll approach that question with two answers. One is tactical, and the other one is strategic. On the tactical side, this is something that my friends in the IPP community are well aware of, but which is the idea of queue reform, essentially separating contenders from pretenders. And the IPP community has had to deal with this for a long time, of spamming queues and having to just find out how can we get our projects where they're needed online. Data centers are starting to see that same phenomenon when they're told by a utility that, hey, we're going to go study your load, come back to us in 18 months, because our transmission group that has been in the corner office for the last 10 years with a nice 3% growth rate all of a sudden is completely overwhelmed. And so mechanisms, either through pricing or whatever it may be, to actually make sure that we're not getting spamming of demand into IOUs and into system planners, like any sort of reform that can separate people, to put skin in the game for people who are actually putting load in right now. Because frankly, planning departments are completely overwhelmed. And there's another interesting phenomenon that I've observed with ISOs and RTOs and utilities as well, is that there's a brain drain phenomenon. And like we've talked about for an industry for a long time, that utilities have been aging. Well, all of a sudden now, all of these tech companies are hiring their talent because we want anybody with utility backgrounds to come in, because it's become critical feedstock. So you're almost cannibalizing the resources you need to go bring in. So I think that's an opportunity for partnership, from skills development to queue reform, you name it. And then on the strategic side, data centers for the last 10 years, in my experience, have been like this kind of shadowy figure. Like we appear at like midnight on a plane ride, ask for some things, and then disappear. And we're not integrated into the planning process. And that really dawned on me this summer. I was speaking to MISO's board, and it occurred to me that I had never actually spoke to this audience before. And hyperscalers have been divorced in many cases from PJM, from MISO, from system operators, unless it's a crisis situation. Then they get flown in, and at that point, we all know that's too late. So I think there's a great opportunity for system operators, utilities, state, local, and federal governments to talk about these things. Like backstage, we were talking about the RFP that had just been issued. A lot of these things feel like that they're done, and they can really move the needle, but they could be force multiplied if we work with RTOs, IOUs, state, local, federal levels to actually make sure that we integrate those planning cycles to enable more capacity, not just decarbonization.
Yeah, so the convening power of the federal government could be very, very helpful there. Yeah, please.
Two quick things to add. I think one thing that's actually underappreciated is there's actually a limited amount of gas that can be withdrawn from the grid, except in places like Texas and Louisiana. So we're going to be able to build some additional gas-fired capacity, but absent some real permitting reform, it's going to be very hard to get additional capacity. So that's why there's an importance to figuring out the right corridors that are strategic to the country and try to enable that infrastructure. The other thing I'm excited about is a lot of the FERC 1000 transmission projects. And I think there's just so much investment, and it creates so much efficiency to interconnect the grid across the country, that getting those to continue and to get more players to be able to compete for those projects will be very valuable.
Fantastic. So since this is the first panel of the 2 days, I would love to hear your hopes and dreams for what the takeaway will be over the next 2 days. What are you hoping to hear, learn, interact with? How do you see the next 2 days going?
I'm excited about the strategic dialogue across different industries. I think this affects every industry. I think there are not only costs, but there are a lot of benefits to what we're discussing here, and I think it's not just about renewables. It's about infrastructure across the board. And when you bring people together and you have the clear financial and other incentives to get things going, I'm very excited about the innovation that's going to come out of that.
Great.
Yeah, I would say one thing is, I mean, we're all here right after a very big election. So like change is certainly on everyone's minds. And this just might be my personal perspective, but I'm a big believer in the positive benefits that come with change. So we're gonna have some change, and I think change can be a catalyst for a lot of individual initiative on the behalf of companies and agencies and utilities and individuals. So I'm very excited, frankly, about the possibility for change because it produces a lot of initiative and surprising things. So I look forward to exploring some of those conversations with people and some of the conversations that I'm going to be participating in and witnessing in the next few days.
Great, so do we. Well, thank you both very much. Incredibly interesting topic, and really appreciate your time and insights. And have fun over the next 2 days.